Hey guys, what is up? I'm filtersc, and this is the Bronze to Masters series, part of the Wood to Bronze series as we get you started to play the game of StarCraft 2 to your full potential, and hopefully you can enjoy the game a little bit more. Today what we're going to do is we're going to dive into the actual menus of the game, and we're going to roll through that really quick. We're going to talk about hotkeys, we're going to talk about setting up the interface so that you can see everything properly. We're going to talk about a few of the graphic settings, but not all of them because there's some super detailed videos about that kind of stuff out there. So let's start. Now the first thing is display mode for me. It started off full screen and it started off 720p. Now that's no good for me because I'm using Fraps to record and I'm a streamer, so I need to have it on windowed full screen. However, for most people you're going to want it on full screen so you can actually pump the frame rate above 60 so you don't get any of those small little dips that you will typically see. And because basically what happens when you're on windowed full screen, the refresh rate defaults to what your monitor is. Sometimes the frame rate will bomb a little bit because of that. So you want to put it on full screen if you can. You don't want to be tabbing out a lot. If you're trying to stream or you're trying to record your gameplay, sometimes you're going to want to tab out. That's when you would use that setting. Otherwise, full screen with your monitor's native resolution is perfectly fine. Now in terms of actual graphic settings, these are the defaults. This is what the game gave me. And I have a fairly powerful computer, so I'm just going to throw it on Ultra. The one big thing is the difference between Ultra and Extreme is literally just the indirect shadows setting. So we'll throw it on Ultra. Indirect shadows is more of a campaign only thing. Doesn't really apply at all to the multiplayer, so you don't need to worry about that. And then we're going to bump our texture quality up to Ultra so the game looks nice and crisp and it's going to look real good when we play. If you don't have a really powerful computer though, you're going to want to go through and kind of tweak these settings almost on an individual basis to get what you need out of them. What you'll see a lot of times is a lot of pro players and even streamers will actually play on low graphics settings and low quality. And the biggest reason for that is you can see things a lot more clearly. You can see when units are dying a lot easier. You don't have all these cool effects and stuff like that splashing all over the screen, kind of obscuring your vision a little bit. However, there are a few players that do play on medium and high settings that enjoy that part of the game, and they will turn it up a little bit. The only other thing too is if you play in Korea, you're going to end up with a reduced violence setting automatically on. That's just purely because of the restrictions in Korea, and that just makes everything have one death animation instead of multiple different death animations. Not so cool, not what we want, so we're going to make everything look as cool as possible by turning reduced violence off. And don't worry about anti-aliasing, it's just a little bit of extra strain for me. It doesn't really matter when I'm playing the game. I like it off, I don't turn it on. You can turn it on if you want. StarCraft 2 though doesn't really have a lot of the problems because you're not zoomed in on things. It doesn't matter too much if everything is super crisp. The game itself looks just fine anyway. And finally, let's get into the graphics settings. Now everything here is going to tell you whether it's based on your graphics card or your CPU, and depending what the weak part of your computer is, you're going to want to change these things. I will say that if you put the game on low, you're going to have tremendous performance on almost any system. Anything medium and higher, you will get a few frame rate drops here and there, especially if you play team games a lot. So keep that in mind when you're going through and kind of tweaking the settings. The big ones to look for though, there's two main ones. One's physics. That's very heavy on your CPU. That's how stuff flies all over and looks super cool. However, it doesn't matter. You can turn it off if your CPU is not that powerful. Unfortunately, StarCraft 2 does not optimize well for 4 or 6 core CPUs or even 8 core stuff. It really only uses 2 cores and like a little bit of a third one. And so keep that in mind when you're doing stuff like this. If you have a really nice quad core, but the clock speeds aren't that great, you might have to turn physics quality down, just as an example, to make sure you don't have any problems when you're dropping frame rate in some of the more intense games. And then your micro suffers a little bit, and then you have trouble. Feel free to turn physics off. That's the big one. The other big one is models. Now, even when people put the game on low detail, they will turn models onto high. The reason for that is then you can kind of see everything that's warping in from Protoss specifically is the main one with models on high. So you'll be able to see whether they're warping in a Stalker or warping in a Zealot. You'll be able to see if a Stargate's making an Oracle or if it's making a Phoenix, whatever. You're going to be able to see that. However, the more you develop your own gameplay, the more you develop your own game sense, the situations where they would warp in, Zealots instead of Stalkers and stuff like that, you're pretty much going to know what they're trying to warp in most of the time as you get better at the game. So it ends up not being that big of a deal. That's why some pros just have it turned off. So again, if your computer's struggling a little bit, you can turn those settings on or off depending on what's going on. Models, again, if you want to have that extra bit of detail, that's where you go to get it. Everything else is more or less just cosmetic and doesn't make a big difference on the game. When you do play in low, the game does tend to look a little bit dark, so there's some ways you can kind of tweak that. Again, I'm not going to go into super detail with that in this video because that involves modifying the variables.txt file, and I never do that, and I don't bother to do that. I just turn the brightness up on my monitor if I do want to play on low settings. And who wants to play on low anyway? So we're going to leave this bad boy on ultra and go from there. The only other thing I'm going to mention just really quickly is if you turn the lighting quality down, you end up getting less of the lights. In terms of shadows, again, you can turn it down to kind of get that big performance boost. Those are your kind of key areas. If you're looking for pure performance, you're just going to want to throw the game on low and be done with it and not care. That's basically all there is to it. Now we're going to jump into the sound. Now I've defaulted my sound effects and everything kind of lines up the way the game is supposed to have it. And all I'm going to do really quickly is just turn off game music, because although the game has fantastic music, I personally don't care if I have game music on or not. It doesn't make any difference to me. Don't care either way, so I turn my game music off. The move sound effects, some people will turn this off, some people leave it on. Really doesn't matter. Things like Hellions have pretty obnoxious sound effects when they're moving around those, so just to clarify things, a lot of people will turn them off. But you do lose a little bit of the richness of the game. The other big ones, interface is just like clicking buttons and stuff like that. It really doesn't matter that much. Voices this part is really important. So this is like your unit responses and stuff like that, right? Make sure you have this one up nice and loud so that you can hear it properly, even if you turn everything else down. You want to be able to hear when your SCVs are finished work. You want to be able to hear when you're under attack, all that kind of stuff. Unless you're specifically trying to train your mini-map ability, right? That's if you're looking to just get better with the mini-map, that's where you would take advantage of that setting to the best of your ability. The next one we're going to talk about are error sounds. Now, error sounds you can either turn on or off if you have a lot of trouble with supply blocks and stuff like that. Error sounds tell you when you don't have enough minerals for stuff. They tell you when you don't have enough SP and gas. They tell you when you supply block. They tell you when you can't make something because you don't have enough minerals. Error sounds are both good and bad. There are actually a lot of pro players that play with them completely turned off. And then there's obviously a bunch of players that have them turned on so they know when that kind of stuff happens. If you want to try to get rid of and eliminate supply blocks, it's actually not a bad idea to turn it off and just rely on your own, checking your supply, checking your money, checking all that stuff on a regular basis, developing that habit, developing that little bit of a cycle going on. That'll help clean that up a lot more than turning this on. So you feel free to turn off error sounds if you want, and you don't want to get annoyed by the not enough minerals thing if you're a bit of a spammer like I am. And for now, though, we're just going to leave all this stuff on default, and we're going to leave error sounds on. We're going to jump into the voice area now. Now, I want to mention one thing really quickly. I'd never talk to my teammates, so I actually turn voice chat off, but I make sure to turn microphone volume down to whatever I normally set my microphone at. And there's a reason for that. StarCraft 2 likes to steal your microphone audio and steal your settings, so don't be afraid to turn that off, guys. That's what's causing the issues when you start jumping into the game. It's really goofy. It's really weird. I hate it, but it is what it is. One thing you can do if you want to trick it is sometimes I'll set it to my webcam because I don't actually use my webcam for microphone, and I've got a couple other mics that kind of hang around. But again, like nobody really uses the voice chat in this game. Don't worry about it. You can just turn it off. If you do want to talk to your friends, highly recommend using an outside program. Now we're going to talk controls. Now for me, I'm just going to turn enable mouse sensitivity off. I don't want StarCraft 2 messing with my mouse sensitivity at all. It really doesn't make any difference. If you want to have, if you're when you're on your desktop, you always have your mouse at a much higher DPI setting. So you run it on your desktop at like 1600. You can use this to change it. There are some guides out there for what percentages are exact, so you get pixel perfect precision. I know within StarCraft 2, I believe at 1080p, and the DPI I was using, it was like 54% for me. I don't care that much, doesn't really matter. Reduce mouse lag is if you're having problems with like things like VSync and stuff messing you up. I don't need to use it. It's not a normal option, so don't worry about turning it on. It really isn't a big deal. Enable mouse wheel zoom. You want to use this purely so you can zoom in and see observers when that does pop up, so make sure you have that option ticked. Reduce mouse lag, don't tick it unless you really do have big issues with your mouse in game. It's one of the if your mouse doesn't work properly, you're going to have a hard time, obviously, right? Confined mouse cursor. So when you're in windowed full screen mode, this makes a big difference. If you have it off, you're going to be able to drag your mouse off the screen and click on another window. You don't want to do that. You want it confined. I leave mine on automatic. You might want to just leave it on. But for me personally, I just leave it on automatic. Sometimes you get the odd bug where you have to tab out and tab back in real quick because things aren't responding. But that shows up very infrequently. Automatic is usually perfectly fine for me. Again, you want to enable mouse scroll because you want to be able to drag to the edge of the map to move your camera around. That is actually one of the most important skills to have in StarCraft 2. Because I'm a streamer and because I have cast games, because I look at a lot of replays, I drag scroll a lot, which means you click the middle mouse button and move around. That's actually really, really bad. You don't want to do that, guys. You want to push the edges of the screen to keep your mouse as free as possible for micro and stuff like that. In terms of scroll speed, I'm actually going to turn mine up. I'm only going to turn them up to 50. You'll see a lot of people will turn this like all the way up to 100 or whatever. In battle, you actually want to be moving the screen around by small amounts. You don't want the screen to just shoot off to the sides. One of the best players in the world for micro is Maru, and he uses a very low scroll speed setting. I believe he might even still be on the default of 20%. So just think about that. He might be on 40, he might be on 20. Either way, it's lower than me. But don't crank this all the way up unless you really feel like you need it. But StarCraft 2 is a game about accuracy, not speed, guys. You want to make sure you're not just blazing all over the place with no control, right? So 50% allows me to stay in control. It allows me to kind of get what I need done. It allows me to move the camera around without having to worry about it too much and all that kind of fun stuff. Invert drag scroll, exactly what it says. Enable smart camera pan, turn this off, never turn it on. It's awful. It might look more cinematic, but it's garbage. For your keyboard, a lot of people will disable the Windows key. For me personally, I don't care. I just leave it on. It doesn't matter. Sometimes I use the Windows key to tab out. Disabling Alt-Tab and disabling the Windows key defeats the purpose of windowed full screen. So, you can do both of those if you find you have a particular trouble. But for me, I don't need to worry about it. I don't. Plain and simple. We're going to go into gameplay. Your expansion level, obviously Legacy of the Void is a separate client right now, so it's not listed there. But there's a few things you need to go through. You're able to, so like let's say you only own Wings of Liberty, you can actually set the Heart of the Swarm expansion level, but it won't let you play one-on-one ladder. You'll only be able to play with your friends. So keep that in mind. Other than that, it doesn't really matter. In terms of interface, obviously show alerts you want on, so if there's a nuke or something like that, you want to be able to see it. This is absolutely vital. Sometimes the alerts will come in really quickly and you won't get all the sound effects, so you want to have the show game alerts on the left side of the screen for sure. The other one is display game timer. This gives you the timer in game, so like let's say a bunch of harass goes down, you're a little bit behind in what you're trying to do, you can use the game timer to center and maybe figure out what your opponent's doing. A good example is Photon Overcharge from Protoss takes 60 seconds to use up, right? So you can just look at the game timer and be like, oh, okay, it's game's at 9 minutes now. If I wait till 10 and go back in, it'll be gone. Real simple stuff. Make sure you have that ticked on. I don't know why it's not on by default, but hey, it's kind of the way the game works. The next one is display build grid. I actually play with it turned off for the most part now, and there's a reason for that, because the build grid will show the buildings will wall off and block, but they don't necessarily always do that. The real big offender here is the command center, which for whatever reason decides never to wall me off properly, so I die to a lot of run-bys if I have a command center in my wall. But if you're new, displaying the build grid is always an excellent thing to do, because you're going to be able to see what's going on and all that kind of fun stuff. World object tooltips, we can turn that off. You don't need it. That's basically like destructible debris and stuff like that. You should kind of know what that stuff does. You can leave it on if you want, but I find it tends to clutter the screen. And let's be honest here, if you're playing a game as fast-paced as StarCraft 2 and you have to tooltip and hover over that, you're gonna have a tough time, right? So just keep that one in mind. Display game tooltips. This is something you can leave on if you want. It'll give you, you can scroll over a barracks or scroll over an upgrade or something. It'll give you a tooltip on that. For me, again, I'm going to turn that off just because it's not something I really need. Displaying the hotkeys on the commands card. Now, typically when I play, I have this turned off, but I'm going to leave it on this account for you guys as often as possible so you can kind of see what the buttons are for the hotkeys. That being said, sometimes I do change a few of my own hotkeys and stuff like that. But if you're brand new to the game, here's what you want to do when you do this. So it's going to tell you if you want to make a Marine, you press the A button, right? That's what the command card will say. And if you're not used to that hotkey, that's going to feel quite challenging, and you're going to want to click on it to make a marine, or you're going to want to click on build and the barracks to build a barracks. Make sure you force yourself to use the hotkeys for stuff. It's okay to have them on the command card, right? But if you look at the command card to build a marine, the first time you're gonna look at it and then press A. The second time you're just gonna press A. Sometimes it might take a few more tries for some of the stuff that's a little bit less common to make, but it's one of the best ways to get used to learning all the hotkeys, because StarCraft 2 is a largely keyboard-driven game, and your mouse is what does all the fancy stuff on the screen, right? So you want to make sure you're able to do that. Again, make sure you display the hotkeys if you don't know them off by heart. Very simple. Enable starter worker rally. Now, this just leave on. Pro League, I think, has it turned off, or the SPL or whatever. And the reason they have it turned off is purely because they want to give like a little bit of nostalgia. But just leave it turned on. Basically, it just means all your workers will automatically rally at the start of the game. The difference between that and like a real split is basically irrelevant. Players can split off the default pull anyway. It doesn't really matter. So don't worry about that one, boys. Doesn't matter. Always show worker status. This will show the number of idle harvesters and all that kind of stuff, or sorry, the number of workers over top of like a command center or a refinery. Make sure you leave this on. It'll tell you up to 24 workers can work on something. It's actually 16 is what you want. You don't need to go over that for mining minerals. You can if you oversaturate, but it's actually not that effective to do so. So again, just leave worker status. It'll help you keep your bases with the correct amount of saturation, so you don't end up with like 30 SCVs on one section and 12 workers working on another base, right? It'll let you spread them out properly, give you the opportunity to quickly check without having to manually select them like we did in the old days of StarCraft 2 and Wings of Liberty. But definitely make sure you leave that setting on. Menu background, doesn't matter. Show unit life bars, always. For me, some people like damage, some people like selected, some people have them off. I have it on always, so I can always see what units are hurt. I can see where my units are at in terms of their own health and all that kind of stuff. Very, very important. I highly recommend you just turn it always on. Damaged does work too, but I still prefer always, just so I have a very clean read and react, rather than a bunch of guys showing up with like yellow health in one section and nothing in the other. I can quickly identify all my units because they'll see a whole bunch of green bars or whatever, right? That's how I do it. That's personally what I like to do. And it's probably the best way to do things. All right, so flyer help is the thing underneath the flyers. So like units like Mutalists and stuff like that, you can actually click them and select them. If you throw it on always, you're always going to be able to see that. I actually just leave it on selected, so you can kind of get the feel. Otherwise, it tends to clutter things up and it becomes just a pain in the ass. The reason is because it's an isometric perspective. If you cast an ability directly on top of what looks like flyer units, you're actually going to miss them. You have to typically cast a little bit below them. That does vary based on the terrain and stuff like that, but it's not a huge setting. There's really not a lot of abilities other than like fungal growth and storm that you're going to need to cast under flyers. So again, I just leave it unselected so I don't get all the clutter. Under replay, just save all replays, display replay time info. Obviously you want all that kind of stuff on there. Simple command card view. Let me turn this off because I can't even remember what this one does. It's been so long, but I just turn it off, so I don't want the simplified command card. The show current order indicator. This will show the direction units are traveling if you send an attack. This is a nice one to have on. I typically actually have been playing with it off lately, but I think I should turn it back on because I'm kind of an idiot. But if you rally, let's say, a Marine to attack on the other side of the map, you're going to see like a little red line underneath it, so you can kind of tell where your units and your things are supposed to be going. So definitely a good one to leave on. When enabled, selecting a single lever will select all lever attached to the same hatchery. Now, I typically leave this on for my own personal use, and I'll if I only want to make 3 or 4 drones, I'll just make 3 or 4 drones and then retoggle the hatchery hotkey if I don't want to turn them all into X unit or whatever, right? Because if you have 7 larvae selected and you choose to make a drone, it'll make 1, and you have 6 larvae selected. Larvae always take priority over eggs in terms of your hotkeys, so it's very simple to make the correct number of units. Again, I leave this on. Some people don't like it on. Personally, I prefer to leave it on. Enable enemy unit selection, turn this on. You actually cannot box, so if you go to box select, which means just dragging your mouse across a section of the map while holding down, you will never select an enemy unit. You have to actually click on it individually. And the reason you want to do this is to check your opponent's upgrades, right? You want to see if he's on, +2 attack. You want to see like what, abilities stuff he has available to him, all that kind of fun stuff. Make sure you're able to select units. Again, I don't know why this is not on by default, but it is brutal. Display experience points. Some people like this on, some people like it off. I tend to leave it off because it just clutters everything up. But some people like it because sometimes you won't necessarily see the death animation for something if it's just a little bit off screen, and then the experience points will be kind of hovering as everything starts to go away. So some people actually do leave this on. Personally, I don't. Enable colorblind mode. I turn on colorblind mode for two reasons. Number one, there's a small percentage of the population that is actually colorblind. So you can see my game's going to look a little bit different than maybe yours if you don't turn colorblind mode on. The other reason I use colorblind mode is actually a psychological one, and it's really cool. But throughout the history, they've done a ton of studies on video games, especially video games that use the red versus blue teams, and the red team actually has like a 53 or 54% win rate, even in totally like mirrored balanced games like Quake. That's insane. So the default StarCraft 2, you can either be red or blue, or if you use there's another mode in the game which makes you always the same color, so the mini-map is always red for your enemy instead of being red or blue. Highly recommend that option as well. We'll talk about that one in game. But your opponent, if your opponent's always red, I don't want them to have that, even that small silly advantage. So I turn colorblind mode on for that reason, as well as a few other ones, like my team colors and stuff like that are actually orange and blue, which is what colorblind mode ends up being. And I like being blue, and I like my opponent being orange. Makes life nice and easy for me. The other one is display team colored life bar. I hate this setting. It drives me nuts because you can't tell quickly at a glance if units are hurt or not. It just makes them entirely like blue or orange or red or purple or whatever your color selection is. Don't bother with this one, guys. It makes the game a lot harder. Additional team color textures. This is useful for some things. I personally don't turn it on because I've been so used to playing without it. But for things like, when two people have mothership cores and they both cast a time warp ability, this will tint the time warp more towards your color, right? So if you cast a time warp, it's going to show up in your colors. If they cast a time warp, it's going to show up in their colors. Personally, I don't turn this on. You can if you want. It will help you distinguish things that are from the other guy from yourself, unless you're used to just kind of figuring it out on your own, which I've kind of gotten used to. Team color intensity, I always turn this up to like 7 or 8 because I just like brighter colors. That's the only real main thing. Finally, we're going to dig into control groups. I turn mine on to unclickable. The reason you want them either hidden or unclickable is so when you go to micro units or anybody that's played a game like League of Legends or Dota or whatever, or even StarCraft 2, has accidentally clicked on the mini-map and got themselves killed. Well, in StarCraft 2, all of a sudden you got like 10 landmines worth of control bars at the bottom if you don't change this setting. So make sure you change the setting, boys. You got to make sure you do it. Observer interface, this is just for like WCS-based stuff. You can just leave it on default. It'll only ever show up when you go into a replay. So don't worry about it. If you want it to look a little bit cooler in a replay, you can turn them on. You can actually download custom ones and stuff like that too. It's pretty cool stuff, but for me personally, I don't bother. Next, we're going to bounce into the social stuff. None of this crap really matters at all. Auto join chat channels, typically you would just turn that off. In terms of privacy, some people will turn these on. I really don't care about any of them. Normally, nobody will ever send me an invite. Only allow friends to send me messages is an option you turn on if you bad-manner people. I don't turn this on because if somebody's not on my friend list and they want to send me a message, I do stream and stuff like that. I do appreciate the good and the bad. Some people will come out and flame me. Some people say good things. Sometimes the other guy just wants to know, like, hey, is there anything I could have done better in the last game? So no point turning that on for me. You can make up your own mind. Not a big deal. Language is as straightforward as it gets. All right, guys. Now we're jumping into the hotkeys section. We're going to make this real fast because this is already a super long video. And just for me, there's a whole bunch of different options. Some people like grid. All grid does is turn it into, the same command is always going to be on the spot, right? So like if attack's here and that's the A button, you basically have a grid on your keyboard. That's how everything's going to line up in terms of the hotkeys. I don't like that, so I just play with standard. There are other options out there that are much more customized. Sorry guys. That are much more customized and really heavily thought out in terms of how they should work in game. However, hotkeys are very overrated in terms of StarCraft 2. It's important to have your basic production and stuff like that on hotkeys. It's important to have the odd, a few control groups to control your units. But your mouse is the star of the show when it comes to moving your stuff around and getting around the map in the game. So don't focus too heavily on hotkeys, boys. I make a few small adjustments to my own, and I'm going to show you them here. But overall, hotkeys are not a big deal. You don't need to go insane with your hotkeys. And I'm just going to create a profile real quick. We're going to call filtersc wood to bronze. There we go. And the profile template is going to be standard. Now I can flip over. And every time, doesn't matter what computer I log into, that's what's going to happen. It's just automatically going to load this. Now for me, there's a few things we need to change. We're going to start off with ProDOS. The Immortal, or not the Immortal, it's actually, we got to go to the Robo Bay, because to build an Immortal, that's annoying. I don't like pressing I, so we're just going to go ahead and move the Immortal over to our, in this case, let's go with the E button. That will get the Immortal over to the left-hand side of the keyboard. Very important. That's really the only unit for ProDOS we need to think about changing, because it doesn't matter too much for everything else. Mothership core you only ever build once, so the fact that it's on M doesn't really matter. We're going to pop over to Terran now. With Terran, I don't actually change anything typically. The only thing you can change is, if you go over to command centers, there's the load and unload. This also applies to medevacs. The same hotkey will actually apply in every case. So if I change these hotkeys, it's gonna apply them across the board typically, right? So I don't care, I don't change them. But on the command center, you notice how there's the liftoff hotkey. L is all the way on the far side of the screen. Some people move it over to like F or something like that. Personally, I don't care, but it's a hotkey you should be aware of. It's one you can think about changing. Otherwise, all the Terran units basically, they're simple. They're almost all on the left side of the keyboard. They're well optimized. Don't need to worry about it. And again, that's just personal. In terms of Zerg, I'm going to make one adjustment. It's not an adjustment. Well, there's actually two adjustments we're going to need to make. So we're going to go ahead and pick the larva, which morphs everything into stuff for us. And for me, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go over to the hatchery because that's the one I need. And we're going to take the queen and I'm going to make it A. Now, the only reason I'm making the queen A is because I used to use Q as a separate hotkey. I don't really anymore. I found it was clustering too many things together and it was actually making me play worse and play slower. So I spread everything back out again. But I've just got used to the queen being on A. It's unfortunate, but it's the way it is now. It doesn't matter for you guys. And you'll see if I go through all the, lair, hatchery, hive, it's all the same stuff now. So again, not a big deal. I'm just going to switch over to larva now. And the only one that's really a big problem for Zerg is the Ultralisk. You can change it if you want. For me, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to make the Ultralisk A as well, and I'm going to go ahead and turn the swarm host into a U, because you don't really need to make swarm hosts anymore except in very specific situations. So I have no problem putting the Ultralisk on the A hotkey. Otherwise, everything is quick and easy to access. Hydra's a little bit out there, but not too far, not a big deal. Now, this is where things are going to get interesting, guys, because we're going into our global hotkeys, and we're going to explain kind of what we're doing here, all right? You don't need to worry about anything in AI, it doesn't matter. But we're going to go into camera, and this is where things are going to start to get crazy. Now, camera hotkeys are one of the more interesting aspects of StarCraft 2, and unfortunately they're defaulted to the wrong F keys, so we got to change them. We're going to go Control F1, Control F2, Control F3, Control F4. Now I really only use these ones, so it doesn't really matter, but I can create a fifth one if I want. So Control F5 will do that. I actually pull the F6 and F7 keys off my keyboard, so I can't use those ones even if I wanted. And we're going to set the jump to location. Now, what's cool about camera hotkeys is it's a really good habit to get into early on in the game. Don't worry if it sounds confusing or you don't necessarily do it that much. I highly recommend you do use camera hotkeys because it's the fastest way to get around your base and the fastest way to kind of learn where to build your production and keep your production consistent in terms of where it is. For ProDOS, it's really nice to be able to just camera hotkey to the back of your base or whatever and warp in pylons, or camera hotkey a forward pylon. Lots of cool tricks you can do with it. It is one of the better things to learn, but it's not absolutely essential. However, I'd highly recommend you do learn how to use camera hotkeys because they are one of the best ways to get around the map and one of the fastest ways. I like to use F1 through F4. I don't really use F5 that much for my 4 bases. And it just lets me deal with harassment. It lets me build things. It lets me do, transfer SVs, build a new command setter. It lets me do all that much, much faster than I could otherwise. So that's the main reason I do that. Other than that, I really don't change anything. Even control groups, I don't care. I tried for a while using Q and W as, control groups 9 and 10. And I found I was just confusing my fingers. I was trying to put too much crap in too tight of a space. My macro fell significantly. So I've gone back to spreading it all out again. And, control groups are, like I said, they're very, very overrated. They're important as all hell to get around the map and to produce units and all that stuff, but they're not actually that important when it comes to microing. You don't need to have everything in a control group. You see a lot of people trying to, hotkey like all these different harassment options and stuff like that. It's actually a lot faster if you're good with your mouse to just click on the minimap and grab the unit. It sounds crazy, but when you're in the middle of a macro cycle, you can actually do both. Right, you can click on the mini-map while macroing to move your camera, hit your few units in your macro and all that, grab the medevac, move it around, right? So there's good and bad to doing both. You should be able to use both to get around, but at the same time, your mouse hand is absolutely key, guys. It means a lot to playing StarCraft 2. So again, for me, just default control group's perfectly fine. I don't need to care. There's no hero, there's no inventory, there's none of that crap in the game. That is for, custom games and stuff like that. Observer controls don't matter, replay controls don't matter. Unit management, however, does. Now you're going to see this idle worker hotkey is now unbound. It used to be bound to F1, and I'm going to go ahead and just add the tilde key as my idle worker hotkey. And then the last one is select all army. I like to use backspace for that. Some people aren't going to like that, and I'll show you why, because we're going to go to unbound here, and you're going to see the tilde is actually push to talk. I'm not going to do that anyway, so who cares, right? And then the camera option is the base camera. Now that some people will talk about the backspace technique, which utilizes the backspace to, you actually use, funnily enough, for the backspace technique, you actually use the space bar now to do that. But I personally don't like that method of inject, and it's something we're not going to cover that much. However, if you do want to use something else for your all army hotkey, feel free. The reason I use backspace for my all army hotkey is because it is much farther away from my left hand, and if I want to use it, I have to physically take my hand off my mouse or move my left hand all the way over. What this means is I use it in very limited circumstances and only when I really, really need it. That's kind of the key. Some people will unbind their all army hotkey altogether if they find themselves relying on it. It's actually not bad practice to do that, but you need to get it off the F2 key, and you need to get the idle worker stuff off the F1 key so that you can use those for camera hotkeys either later on or right now. You don't want to get used to using those bad boys as regular hotkeys, boys. It's really important not to do that. And from there, that's it. I really don't change very much, guys. Just a few little tweaks, a few little changes. Like I said, I'm sorry about the queen thing. Just kind of a habit I developed. But you do want to move the Ultralisk, and you do want to move the Immortal for sure. For me, like I said, I just moved the Queen because, I don't know, it happened that way, and now I use A to make Queens. Nothing I can really do about it. I don't need to bind those hotkeys because I don't care, and the game will work just fine without them. I'm going to hit yes. I'm going to hit OK. All my settings are dialed in. They're all locked in, guys. And on the next episode, I'm going to come back and I'm going to play a few team games. And we're going to talk about the game and that kind of stuff. I highly encourage you go out after you get all your settings done, play a few team games as well. And just go out there, have some fun, play a little bit of StarCraft, guys. It is a really, really, really fun game. It's a good game. Highly recommend you go out there and just start playing, boys. Sorry the last 2 videos have been a little bit longer. The reason for that, obviously, is there's a ton of stuff to cover up front. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed the videos. Hopefully this stuff has made sense. If you didn't really watch that much and you just kind of skipped to the end of this episode, that's cool too. I might end up, well, not might, I will end up doing a separate hotkey video, and we'll go into real deep detail about all the hotkeys and what's important and what's not important. And we'll talk about how it relates to army movement and all that kind of stuff in the future. But that video is not out yet. It will be soon. And I will see you guys next time. Make sure you follow me on Twitter. Make sure you follow my stream if you want. The links are below. Don't forget to check out the sponsorships as well that you're going to find below. And we'll talk to you guys later on.